Thank you, and I'd like to welcome you to a very exciting Bible class. Well, at least I think so, maybe I should say. Yeah. We don't study out of any kind of a booklet or anything like that, or a set of studies that we buy somewhere. We study the Word of the Lord from the Word of the Lord. And that's a good way to study. And at this moment we are studying the great people of history. To most people, history is nebulous. This happens, that happens, a war came. It's people that cause all those things. If you had not had a Hitler, you would not have had a World War II, you see. And so, in order to understand the story of mankind, which is history, then you must study people. And so we are studying people that made history good. Most people spend their time studying the people that made history bad. Well, we got enough of that. I just soon study the ones that made it good. And we have the story here of a man named Daniel. He was part of the first world empire. The first empire that actually controlled the earth, the military part of it. He was involved in that. And so we're going to study this man, Daniel, related to the Golden World Empire. This young man was a slave, and he was a prince. And he was a prince before he was a slave. But he died a slave. Even though he became the prime minister of the Golden Head, the world's greatest empire, he was yet a slave. We have no record of him ever receiving his freedom from slavery. He lived and died in a foreign land. Well, let's read about it. In Daniel chapter 1, and between verses 1 and 16, we're going to read just a few of the verses, beginning there in verse 1. And the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel and of the king's seed. Now, that's what I wanted you to notice, to show you that he was a prince. Of the king's seed and of the princes, you see. So he was a prince. And a lot of people have missed that about Daniel. They think Daniel was a poor little country boy that they nabbed up by the nape of the neck and dragged him over to Babylon, and he grew up from there. But that is not true. He was of very noble blood. He was of royal blood. But not only was that, but he wasn't a dummy. Of the king's seed and the princes, and then verse 4 says, children in whom was no blemish. So when they weren't just looking for kids that said, well, I'm the king's son, and looked like an idiot. Now, they weren't looking for that. It says he was without blemish. There was no blemish upon him. But well-favored. Well-favored. And so they were searching for some particular kind of outstanding people. Well-favored. You still with me there? Verse 4. And skillful in all wisdom. You see what they were looking for? And so before he got to Babylon, he was already something. I'd never heard anybody say that about Daniel, so he's not wanting to give it to you. We always have him in a lion's den, but brother, he was in a school class before he got in the lion's den. He was skillful in all wisdom. Listen, he was cunning in knowledge. Is your Bible like mine? Well, I just wanted to know. You weren't saying much about it. I just want to be sure. Are you with me? And understanding science. Now, you getting how great he was? And such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace. Hey, he was a diplomat, you know. Had the ability to stand in a king's palace. And so he was a diplomat. And whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. Now, some people are simply not gifted, you know, in languages. And this young man had to have a particular gift and picking up the king's language without slobbering all over it. How many like to hear your language about half spoken? Yeah, it's hard to carry on a conversation, isn't it? When you have to say, what did you say? Yeah, well, what did you say? Forget it. Don't say it. And so he had to have a lot of qualifications to get anywhere. And so he was an unusual young man. Daniel was young. He was a student. He was a prince before he was taken captive from his native Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, the king of the first world empire of Babylon. It was a tremendous change to be dragged from a princely palace to become a prisoner in a foreign land. So our first thought about him is this: the young slave prince. The young slave prince. And Daniel 1 and 6, if you still have your Bible open to that first chapter. Now among these were of the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Now you know the last three there is what you call the three Hebrew children. They're the three that went into the fiery furnace and came out without getting burned. And so that's the way that you know them. And you know Daniel by going into the lion's den and also becoming the prime minister of the land. And so he was a young slave prince. Now, the first thing of any notable interest we find about him is that Daniel refused to eat the king's meat. Now, none of us know much about a king's table. But a king's table is about 6 smorgasbords put together. About 4 come and dines. Now we got you. It's laden high with the best chefs in the land, with the richest food there is, loaded with all kinds of wine, and more than that, it was offered to idols before they ate it. And so Daniel said, I will be glad to be anything I can in the kingdom, excepting I will not eat of the king's meat. Now the word meat there doesn't mean steak. It meant the whole table. You know, I refuse to eat at that table. I refuse to eat of that food. Now that's where most of us would have fallen aside right there. We say, hey, I got it made. You know? But that was the first thing we see about him of unusual aspect. He said, I will not eat of the king's meat. That's in Daniel 1 and 8. You're still in that first chapter. Daniel purposed in his heart. So this thing came from down on the inside of him. It had nothing to do with his thinking. Had nothing to do with the food being beautiful or delicious. It was a spiritual thing. He purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself. Now by defiling himself, it could have been a spiritual and a natural thing. It could have been a natural thing in that if he had gone in for that stuff, he'd have been a roly-poly rolling around the palace rather than walking. And he just wanted to keep the same person that he was with real dignity and charm and not gloat over excessive taking in of food. And also, if they had a big celebration and offered it to their heathen gods, he certainly wouldn't want to be part of eating something that they just ask a devil to bless. Smith Wigglesworth, one time when I was with him over in Wales, the Welsh people are very lovely people, and we were over there preaching, and they had dinner on the ground. And most of the dinner on the ground was that they had killed a pig and had roasted all that meat. And so we got over close to the table. He looked around and he said, what kind of meat is it that you have today? And they said, we have pig. Now the Welsh people like pig, and most English people do, and some Americans. But he looked the whole table over. They said, would you pray, Brother Wigglesworth? And there was one thing about him, he was very frank about what he said. He stood right up and he says, God, if you can bless this hog that you have already cursed, would you bless it to these people? And he took a piece of bread off the table, went and sat down over on the side and ate it by himself. They understood exactly how he felt about it. But they went ahead and ate it. That didn't bother anybody. They went right ahead and ate it. But he said, I will not defile myself spiritually or naturally with a portion of the king's meat. And then he said, nor with the wine which he drank. You know, there's some of us that take it socially, and that's why we die, socially. You know, that's why we kill somebody on the highway, socially. We have about 25,000 of those social deaths every year. Somebody drank alcohol and got on the highway and couldn't see where they were going. And so he said, I will not defile myself with it at all. And so that was the first mark that we see of him that, you know, revealed something unusual about him right there. And the next one is in Daniel 1:17, where God gave him wisdom and knowledge. And that's very, very significant. It may be because of this verse 8 that he got verse 17. You know, if you don't make a commitment to God, then God doesn't make commitments to you. But in verse 17 it says, as for these 4 children. Now you say, what in the world does it mean by children? Well, they might have been 19 or 20. Or among hoary heads of ruling a nation, they might have been, you know, 22 or 23 or 24, and they still call them children. They call them children because they weren't as old as the others. And Daniel 1:17, and as for these 4 young men, it says here, God gave them knowledge. Hey, isn't that good when God just passes out knowledge? God gave them knowledge, and then he gave them skill. God gave them skill. Have you ever asked God for anything like that? I've heard of people that their car broke down, they couldn't repair it, they just knelt down and prayed and got up and fixed it and went on. Well, God gave them knowledge, you see, to do the right thing. Knowledge and skill. Now this will overwhelm me here. Is it in your Bible the same? All learning and wisdom? Is that the same in your Bible? All learning and wisdom. And Daniel had understanding in visions and dreams. Now, I'm sure there's a connection between that verse 8. He said, I will not be defiled, and by not becoming defiled, he became a man understanding visions and dreams. You see, and so, you know, the two don't go together. If you give your flesh all that it wants, I assure you one thing, your flesh is not going to feel much of the Holy Ghost. If you're going to fulfill all the desires of your flesh, for example, if you say, every time I'm hungry, I'm going to eat, well, you're not going to get much spiritual life. You get maybe a tag along, get a little from somebody, but you're not going to get the great visions and revelations. You're going to have to hold in there and say, wait a minute, I will deny myself in order that I might receive more from heaven. Can you say amen? Now, this was so great that in the next verse, 2 verses, in verse 19, it says, and the king communed with them. You know, this news got around that here's a man that had an unusual understanding, especially in the supernatural, visions and dreams. And the king communed with them. And among them all was found none like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore stood they before the king. And so they had an upgrading. They were brought in from the group into a selective situation, and they stood before the king. Now, this will turn the head of a lot of people. When they get praise and they get honor, then they become different. I hear in Daniel 1:20, it says, and in all matters of wisdom and understanding, that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times. That's a lot, isn't it? If you say double, that's pretty good, you know. But he found them 10 times better than all the magicians. Now, it was a supernatural, you see. The magicians were working with the devil, and he was working with Jehovah. And he said, no wonder he found them 10 times better. 10 times better than all the magicians and the astrologers that were in all the realm. Pat Robertson the other day brought in last year's newspaper, one year ago, and it gave all the prognostications of the astrologers for this year. And he and, is his name Ken that works with him? Huh? Ben. He and Ben sat there and laughed all the way through the program because all of them were wrong. You see, they kept last year's sayings, you know, that what was going to happen during the year. And at the end of the year, they read it over television, and none of them were right. None of them were right. Someone was saying about our weather that they said last summer that the worst winter we'd ever had would be upon us. Well, we can't help having the best one, can we? Yeah. And they asked one of these weathermen why it was they didn't know about it. They said they didn't look behind the right hedgehog's head for the hairs there. I think God finally has something to do with the weather. It's good to be on God's side. You know, the devil can make a lot of noise. The Bible says he goes about as a roaring lion. Yeah, he's toothless though. He makes a lot of noise, but God's people just keep going straight ahead. If you know it, say amen. Daniel was challenged because he got into 10 times better than all of these other fellows that claim to have, you know, unusual mysteries, you know, that were in the supernatural. But the king had a dream, and he even forgot what it was. You know, kings are unusual people. And he not only wanted an answer to the dream, but they had to remake the dream. He had lost the dream too. So they had not only to give an answer, they had to find the dream first. And he had a little problem there. And now we're over into chapter 2 of Daniel. And the wise men of the realm could not tell of the dream or the interpretation to the emperor. And he demanded of them. And verse 5, he says, the king answered and said to the Chaldeans, and they were the astrologers and the soothsayers, the thing is gone from me. He had lost it. Should have gotten up and written it down. And if ye will not make known unto me the dream with the interpretation, ye shall be cut in pieces, and your house shall be made a dunghill. Hey, you know, if Studebaker had done like that, they'd have still been in town. Oh, the guys that didn't work, if he'd have just, you know, well, let's don't go into that. That was pretty hard, wasn't it? Verse 10 says, of the same chapter 2, the Chaldeans answered before the king and said, there is not a man upon earth that can show the king's matter. You know, when you don't know anything, it's very easy to say nobody knows. That's just because you don't know. You know, it can't be done. That's because you can't do it. Yeah, but you shouldn't be so all-inclusive. There might be others that can do it, you know. They said, nobody in the earth can show the king's matter. Therefore, there is no king, nor lord, nor ruler, that even asks such things of any magician or astrologer or Chaldean. Yeah, well, the devil's bunch don't know much. And sometimes they're even poor guessers. And verse 11, it is a rare thing that the king requireth, and there is none other that can show it before the king. Now they get down to basics. Except the gods, he was getting upstairs now, whose dwelling is not with flesh. You know, they had done all the flesh could do, and they were admitting that what they were doing was in the flesh. But he said, now that there is a God up there like that, except we just don't know him, you know. They weren't acquainted with him. And that's when they had to have Daniel. That's when his 10 times came in. His 10 times better, that's when it came in. In Daniel 2 and 19, it says, then was the secret revealed unto Daniel in a night vision. So God shows Daniel the dream and gives him the interpretation of it. And Daniel blessed the God of heaven. He blessed Jehovah. And he blessed the God of heaven. Now in Daniel chapter 2 and verse 38, and that's saying the king's dream depicts coming empires. And here you have the story of the metallic image. That's in the 2nd chapter of the book of Daniel. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, now that's the reason we know it's a world empire. Wherever the children of men dwell was where he ruled. The beasts of the field, the fowls of the heaven, hath he given unto thine hand. You see? And so he was an emperor. He was an emperor over wherever men dwelt on the face of the earth. And hath made thee ruler over them all. Thou art this head of gold. And so there was the relationship right there. That this image had a golden head showing all the empires. We're right down into the feet of that. How many have heard teaching on that? You already have. My. 9/10 if you don't know anything about it. Isn't that a shame? We thought we'd already taught it, you know. You can certainly get it in the bookstore there, and audio tapes, videotapes, or anything telling you all about it. And you certainly ought to get into it. It says, you're that head of gold. Verse 39 says, and after these shall rise another kingdom inferior to thee, and that was the kingdom of Persia, the mighty king of Persia, Persian Empire. And then a third kingdom shall be of brass, and that was the Grecian kingdom, which shall rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron. That was the Roman kingdom. And we still got the fragments of that Roman kingdom today. And we rule nations by the same theories of the Caesars right now. We're still in that same empire. For as much as iron breaketh in pieces and subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. Now, if you study the Roman Empire, you'll find that what God told about it here, 500 or 600 years before it is born. You see, that's when you know you're on the ball. When this bunch of magicians here in the United States and all these stargazers and all these people that are charging money for their astrological readings and all, and they missed all of them. And they'll miss them all this year. Yeah, they'll miss them all this year. And still people will pay millions of dollars for that bunch of baloney. You get it in the Bible free, absolutely free. Verse 41 says, and whereas thou sawest the feet and the toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, that's the area that we're living in right this moment. The kingdom shall be divided, and there shall be in it the strength of the iron, which is communism. For as much as I saweth the iron mixed with miry clay, the clay is democracy. All weak and back there in Washington fighting each other, supposed to be the same government, fighting each other, one going uphill, one going down. And you and I are in the middle, getting torn both directions. And as the toes of the feet will be in the time of the great tribulation, and the common market of Europe will very likely be the toes in that feet, the 10 toes of that feet, and part of clay. So the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And that's the way it is today. You've got the strength of communism that rules completely, absolutely, and then you've got the weakness of democracies just fluttering around and don't know which way they're going. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. Isn't it amazing that God told this man that, over 500 years before Jesus was born? But they shall not cleave one to another. See, they won't mix. You cannot mix socialism with what we call democracy. They don't go together. If a man's going to make his own, he's not going to give it to somebody else. He's going to keep it. But they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. And so here is a man who became, because of that, the prime minister of that land. He became the one that ruled that land. The king exalted him and made him only next to the emperor himself and ruling over Babylon because of the relationship that he had with God. Now in that same reading in chapter 2 in verse 44, and in the days of these kings, now that is the 10-toed kingdom, or what is the common market in Europe today with the 10 countries that are part of that common market. In the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom. Now that's the millennial kingdom of the Lord Jesus that will last 1,000 years, which shall never be destroyed. You see, it'll last 1,000 years, but it will never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people. Every other kingdom, the Babylonians, they got killed by the Persians. The Persians got destroyed by the Greeks, and the Greeks got destroyed by the Romans, and the Romans have been in a mess ever since. And so you've got one destroying the other, but it says it will never be left to other people, this kingdom. It'll be a perpetual kingdom. But it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Now that is the kingdom of the Lord Jesus Christ, and it will positively stand forever. You say, well, what happened to that kingdom where Daniel was? Now, Daniel, in my first remarks, I showed you how great he was. You go right on over there, and you find Daniel in the new empire. Brother, when they traded from the Babylonian Empire to the Persian Empire, Daniel went right along with it. He says, I was in Shushan the palace. Yeah, he didn't lose anything. But this is what happened in the end of the empire where he was a prime minister. Daniel 5 and verse 25 to 28. And this is the writing that was written. Now again, it was written on the wall of the palace, and nobody could read it. They called for all the magicians again, and for all the soothsayers and all the astrologers and all, and they looked, and they couldn't read it at all. And Daniel came in and says, there it is, mene, tekel, upharsin. And he says, this is the interpretation of the thing. Meaning, God has numbered your kingdom, and he has finished it. Tekel, thou art weighed in the balances, and you are found wanting. Verse 28, Peres, thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. And neighbors, that very night, that empire fell. That very night, it was all destroyed. It was gone. And so here we find Daniel, a mighty man, a great man of history, one of the great people of history, in that he was really the prime minister in two of the great empires of the world. It's never been done by any other person. Daniel's was a life of conviction, if you want to be like Daniel. It was a life of courage. He went under the lion's den because he prayed with an open window. When they said, don't pray, brother, he opened his windows and did it. He just wanted to be sure nobody missed it, was all. And so he had courage. He had dedication to God. He lived in such a manner that his accusers could find no fault in him, the Bible says. He kept good books. Could find no fault in him. He was handling millions of dollars, but they couldn't find any fault with him except in the way he prayed. They didn't like the way he prayed. In Daniel 6:4 it says, then the presidents and the princes sought to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find none occasion of fault, for as much as he was faithful, neither was there any error of fault found in him. But I love to live like that. There was no errors in him. Man, he was a living computer, you know. There was no errors found in him. Here was a man that truly knew God, truly loved God with all of his heart. One of the great men of history. Now, the only reason God put that in the Bible is to show you the potential of your life and the possibilities that are with us. If we follow the same principles as he did, then we can have the same blessing from God in heaven. Do you believe it? Such a great man, such a beautiful man. He lives on. We still name our children Daniel. We cut it down to Dan. We're a little short in power, but we call it Dan. But we still name our children after this remarkable person that lived so long ago. May you and I live in such a way that people name their children after us when we're gone.